The future of the Chargers in San Diego heads to the ballot box. Will voters root for the home team? Police oversight would increase if Measure G passes, but critics say it doesn't go far enough. And increased density could help solve housing and environmental issues in the region. But will residents vote for it? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our KPBS Environment reporter, Eric Anderson. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Mark.
Good to have you here today. Investigative producer J.W. August of NBC7 San Diego. Hi, J.W.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're back with us. Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS. Hi, Allison.
Hello, Mark.
And Andrew Bowen, Metro reporter for KPBS. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Mark.
Well, a decade's worth of yammering about a new football stadium finally comes to a head on Election Day. Measure C, as in Chargers, would raise hundreds of millions from tourists for a new stadium/convention center expansion downtown. Well, Eric, start with the basics here. How much for this stadium overall? What are our ballpark figures, and how much from Measure C, and where's that money going to come from?
Well, I think the big thing to think about when you think about Measure C is the fact that it's just a proposal. A lot of the pictures you've seen of a stadium is just an idea. Hasn't been designed yet. What it does, it creates a mechanism, a financial mechanism that allows the city to move forward to build a football stadium in downtown. It's identified the location. It's a location just to the near the library and Petco Park, and it raises the tourist occupancy tax, transient occupancy tax, the tourist tax, from 12.5% to 16.5%. That figures out to about $1.2 billion roughly that the city can then borrow with some additional money from the Chargers and the NFL. That would presumably be enough to build the stadium convention center complex that they're looking at.
Okay, and the sweeten the deal, it's not just for 10 football games a year. It's an annex, so we'd have all sorts of big conventions in here supposedly that would spill into this
The
facility.
idea is to create that convention space, which would create additional demand for hotel rooms. That's one of the selling points.
And another big selling point is, as you say, the tourists are going to pay for this thing. It's not really going to come out of the general fund of the taxpayers. Is that really true in the long run? Are there some contingencies and rainy day scenarios where we get stuck with some of this or not?
There are different analyses of the proposal. Some of them look at that and say the financials are a little too rosy, and there's a chance that the city may be on the hook. Some of them look at the financials and say, well, it kind of pencils out, it makes sense. In many cases, it depends on who you ask. The Chargers hired Hyundai Strategic Partners to look at it, and they found that it's going to work very well. It's going to raise a lot of money for the city of San Diego, won't be a drain on the city's coffers. The San Diego County Taxpayers Association looked at it and said they were a little concerned about it. The hotel industry, which is opposed to the measure, looked at the measure and said, well, it's not going to generate the kind of revenue that we need to cover the annual cost of the project. So they don't like it very much. So it depends on who you ask, but it's one of those things where you really don't know until it's actually in motion.
And I think one of the
question.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Well, everybody
I'll
wants to jump in.
now.
Just go ahead, Andrew. We'll come back to Allison.
A lot of the opponents to Measure C seem to say, like, this is money that we're taking money away from road repair and everything. That's not exactly true, because it's coming from the hotel room tax, which otherwise would be going into the general fund. So it's like we're saying we're getting this extra tax money in, and instead of spending it on other things that we should be spending it on, we're spending it on a stadium.
That's an excellent point. In fact, it is a huge tax increase. It's a significant tax increase that also changes the way tourism marketing is funded here in San Diego. And that tax money, if it was to go into the general fund, you could use it for libraries, you could use it for streets, you could use it for any civic purpose. And you're going to raise all of this money, but it's never going to see the general fund because it's going to be
It's going to go to this one thing. Allison?
So one of the questions I have is, under D, that money would still be raised by the tourist tax, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that you'd have to build a Charger stadium. So
That's Measure D also on the ballot.
Also on the
We'll
ballot,
get to that.
right.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead. No, that's fine. Go ahead.
So, I mean, someone who is thinking, well, we could use a little bit more money to fix the potholes and do all the other things that the city desperately needs, that it might be that if you voted for D, you would actually get that income and it would go into the general fund.
D is a different proposition. We can talk about that
go ahead.
in a
That's
second.
fine.
But I just want to kind of close the loop on the Measure C here, which is to emphasize that it's very clearly about one thing. It's designed to build a stadium for the Chargers. There is no question that that's what everything around it is designed for. The convention center space, it's an ancillary item designed to make it more palatable. I think that's pretty clear. Measure D is a totally different animal. It's a different proposition that looks at a number of different things around the city of San Diego.
Also raises taxes on tourists.
It also raises the tourist tax, not as high. It goes from 12.5% to 15.5%. That money goes directly into the general fund, where the city could use it for anything. But here's what Measure D does that Measure C doesn't do. It creates guidelines for development in several key areas. In Mission Valley, the Qualcomm Stadium site, were ever to be redeveloped, it would create a plan for exactly how that gets done. It would suggest selling the land to universities like San Diego State and UCSD. It would create a river park. It could possibly renovate the existing stadium or build a new stadium there, but no public money would be included for that. It would allow for the construction of a downtown stadium or a stadium in Mission Valley, but it would not allow for the use of public money for those two projects.
And the very nature of that measure is pretty confusing, and I think that's going to be a problem selling to voters. They don't understand it. And as the independent budget analysis, did they find in both cases there was no way to determine whether there is an end value, a positive flow to the city?
What was the impact on
I talked to the independent budget analyst on Measure C, and what they looked at was a range of possibilities. And in that range of possibilities, the city could be forced to kick in extra money. The project could also possibly under that scenario, a different scenario with how the economy does, it could pay for itself too. So they're just saying it's in that range of possibilities there. I didn't see their analysis on Measure D, but I think the thing about Measure D that we also didn't talk about yet is it also restricts expansion of the convention center downtown. It doesn't allow for a contiguous expansion
on the waterfront.
So it would require an annex that's off.
A lot of variables.
I did want to make one point about D. If D passes, say C were to fail and D were to pass, the NFL says it won't put up its share then to build a Charger stadium, and I think the reason is we're considered a smaller market, and without public money, the NFL is not going to partner on that one. So
that's something they've said. The NFL is not clear on that particular proposal. They have been very clear on Measure C. It's something that they support.
All right. Few seconds left. Both of these apparently, and there's some argument about this, have to reach a 2/3 threshold, right? Is that likely?
It depends on who you talk to in terms of whether or not they do. I think it's fairly clear that Measure C requires that 2/3 because it raises taxes for a specific purpose, and that's kind of the threshold that was set legally earlier this year. Measure D is a little bit different because it does raise taxes. It raises the tourist tax, but it puts that money directly into the general fund, and then it allows for some funding to be removed for a convention center expansion or the construction of this park. So it's a little bit different, and I think that's where some of the legal dispute is. I don't think it's clear, and I think with Measure D, if it does get that 50% to pass, and it is approved, that probably is going to face some sort of a legal challenge. Yeah,
legal challenges are probably in the future. All right, we'll see what happens on Election Day as we're only 11 days out now. We're going to move on now. A ruling this week by a federal appeals court will allow lawsuits against the San Diego police to proceed over a pair of fatal shootings by officers. JW, start with these two cases. They were a few years back, and just summarize, give us the thumbnail on those victims.
Victor Ortega was shot twice, and Angel Lopez was shot 3 times in the back.
Okay.
Separate incidents completely.
Okay. And this was back in 2012 and 2013.
Correct.
Okay.
The district attorney did not investigate it. Mr. DeMonis' office agreed that they were in fear of their life.
Okay. Well, you say they didn't investigate. They didn't file charges.
They didn't file charges.
Yeah.
They did investigate.
Yeah, after investigating,
right.
they didn't file criminal charges against the police agents. So we're talking about civil lawsuits here in federal court.
There are actually civil rights violations they're claiming under federal law, and the most, if you take somebody's life, that is the ultimate civil rights violation.
Right.
And in both cases, 2 different judges. Both judges had moved forward on the case and had found enough evidence of inconsistencies in the police reports that they wanted to move forward with the case. In both cases, the city attorney appealed and went to the appellate court. I watched the entire 35-minute grilling by the appellate judges, and they found inconsistencies in what the police said. Shanahan, who is the city attorney defending the city, argued that there were no inconsistencies. But if you look at the medical examiner's reports and the path of the bullets, where they entered the body, where they ended up,
they raise a lot of questions.
We sure do. It sounds in both cases that both of the dead men were in positions where the police had control of them, but they were still shot.
Okay.
And that's what it comes down to.
All right, so these now this ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, that puts it back into federal court in San Diego.
Two cases, two judges.
And what they're saying is basically, there's enough questions here. Let's let a jury take a look at this, and let's let the process proceed.
Yeah, they're not saying
they're not endorsing the
messed up. They're just saying there's enough questions here that that a jury could find fault with the San Diego Police Department.
Okay, and we're not going to halt this proceeding at this point.
Correct.
All right, now to tie this back to our theme today, which of course is the election and local issues here. This does relate to this upcoming city election, and we've got Measure G on the San Diego ballot here. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a Citizens Review Board. It's an attempt to make it more transparent. I've actually
so they would review police shootings and other.
Correct. They will review police shootings. That's part of this now. They used to only review items brought to them by Internal Affairs. Okay. And I've been covering them for 5 years off and on. And we've gotten to the point where the board is evolving. I can't take sides on a measure, but I think it's the key to this measure is that the city attorney's office will no longer provide the legal advice, or they have the opportunity to remove the city attorney's
They have the
office.
opportunity to. They wouldn't necessarily do that. Andrew?
That's what people. So this Measure G originally came from this group, Women Occupy San Diego, and sort of like a grand jury report said there's a conflict of interest if the city attorney is representing the Citizens Review Board while the same office is representing the San Diego Police Department.
Yeah, it would seem like a conflict even for lay people like me.
Sure, it does. Apparently it doesn't meet the legal classification for a conflict of interest, but what Measure G does really is it allows the City Council in the future to reform the Citizens Review Board more easily. So there's no, the City Council chose not to go that extra mile and say, absolutely, we want to have independent representation for the CRB all the time, and we want to give them subpoena power.
So is that why some critics are saying that this is kind of weak tea? Measure G really doesn't have a lot of teeth in it?
It's not where it needs to be, but it's a start. Yeah. There has been an evolution in that board and how its business is handled in the last 5 years.
Okay. But is anybody actually opposing this?
Well, so I don't think so. There was no argument filed against. There was no argument filed against it in the ballot. The people who actually brought it forward, who wanted this reform to happen, they say it doesn't go far enough, but we're still going to support it because we see further down the line we can make more of an impact advocating for greater reform at the City Council.
And I saw the Women Occupy go to the Citizens Review Board and talk to them. And I saw their faces, and I talked to them after the Citizens Review Board blew them off. And I knew they were angry, and that motivated them to become the face of this change. Up to then, these were white women, middle class, housewives. There wasn't some poor guy from Encanto pleading his case. So because of who they were and that they were organized, they were able to move this forward. So they deserve a great deal of credit to bringing this to the public's attention.
But the Citizens Review Board doesn't really have a long track record in San Diego of actually finding fault with police shootings, the shootings or the incidents that they've been asked to review. So how does this move them into an area where they can take a more objective view?
That's a good question.
I don't think it does. I think that's the answer. I think that it
kind of leaves it to a future council.
It leaves that decision to make it more independent further down the road, and it will make another reform a little bit easier because now the mayor and the city council together have the responsibility.
That's a key element too, because it used to be the mayor appointing people, and Jerry Sanders was the mayor at the time when one of the people wasn't reappointed, an attorney, and Jude Litzenberg, and she deserves some credit too because she talked about what she saw as an attorney happening inside the CRB, and it was quite eye-opening.
Well, it looks like this, as you say, not a lot of opposition that this will pass, so it'll be up to some future mayor, some future council to see if they put some teeth in this and what becomes of the police review board.
I think so, and the Women Occupy said, we're not going to let this go. We're going to come back to council and talk about it again.
All right. Well, let's turn now to another issue before voters. Measure T in the seaside city of Encinitas deals with housing density, a critical issue everywhere. Allison, start with why Encinitas is unique in San Diego County and what Measure T is supposed to remedy regarding that.
Okay, well, the city of Encinitas is the only jurisdiction in San Diego County that does not have a state-approved housing element, which is a plan for where you're going to increase density. We know that we're going to get more population, so every city has to have a plan for, okay, where are you going to put that extra density?
Trying to fight the sprawl and constant expansion throughout the region, yeah.
And Encinitas also recently passed a Proposition A that said that anything that was against the general plan had to go to the voters as a whole. So the voters now are holding the city hostage, and they have a very hard time reaching agreement on where this density should happen. So rather than just the city council voting on it, which is the case, I think, in San Diego, they have to put it to the whole vote, everybody in Encinitas. So the council, in fact, all 5 of them are supporting this. They've said, we've already, we've put this to consultants, we've spent almost $1 million, we've been sued because we don't have this plan. This is the most sustainable plan. Here it is. Vote on it. And it's still unclear whether it will pass, because if you walk around Encinitas, there are a lot more no on T signs than yes on T signs.
Well, and it does, as you say, have a lot of opposition. And what's the big argument against this?
Well,
measure?
I think residents feel the literature says we're the last sort of coastal village. They want to keep their coastal village. They don't want to lose their coastal village character. And at a demonstration recently, they had a balloon, a red balloon, that showed the new height limit of 48 feet compared to the green balloon, which was only 30 feet. That was the maximum right now.
Big difference, 18 more feet. Yeah.
They said, oh, this is going to cut off the ocean views from the library. So it's going to change our community character. And I think, they feel like the development community has had a hand in this. There's always suspicion that somebody else is going to profit off the density. Which may be a valid concern, but the fact of the matter is the city has to have a plan, and nothing will necessarily get built as a result of the plan. This is just where it could get built.
The housing element plan, if this doesn't get voted in, I think, aren't there lawsuits lined up? I mean, aren't they? It's clear that they're
what's interesting, I think, JW, is that up until now it's been the development community and the Building Industry Association that has sued the city, but they've both won, both of those suits. The city has lost and paid a lot of money. But now an environmental attorney, Mark Gonzalez of Coast Law Group, is jumping in and saying, if this fails, I'm going to sue you because I think this is a good plan. And I've spent my life trying to fight bad developments, but I'm now spending my life trying to fight for developments that are good ones, and this is a good one.
So I wonder, if you go around Encinitas and ask people, of course you want to keep this sort of small seaside village and everything. Is that even sustainable? This sort of lifestyle that we've enjoyed ever since, the post-war boom, can we even sustain that kind of lifestyle? Because we have more people moving here, and with a very limited supply of housing, it's just going to get more and more unaffordable for everyone.
Well, I think this is it. They do have quite a bit of money, Encinitas, because they have high property values, so they can pay these lawsuits, and they can fight, and they can spend $1 million of taxpayers' money on fighting the lawsuits. But the fact of the matter is that every jurisdiction is attempting to play its part in what the whole region is facing, which is growth. And so, why should Encinitas be the only one that gets away with not having a plan?
Is it the case because Encinitas property values are so high that people are concerned that this higher density is going to hurt their property values?
They got theirs.
Yeah.
That is obviously part of it. They talk a lot about quality of life, but I think if you have a high-rise density, multifamily homes right next to you, it would affect your property values possibly. Yeah. This is
that's an interesting point because, we all talk about the housing affordability crisis. Housing is so unaffordable. That benefits homeowners. Homeowners are benefiting from the affordable housing crisis because that means that, with less and less housing being built, their property values are going up and they'll just get more money from their homes.
Well, the other point to remember about this is that those multifamily homes that will be allowed will very likely not be affordable. They're likely to be luxury condos. They're multifamily, but, know, they'll still be over $500,000. So it may not bring down the house prices that much, because I think they'll be very high-end multifamily
It would
homes.
take a massive boom in construction and a lot more to actually sort of have a real impact on the small A affordable housing, non-subsidized but just general market rate housing.
Is anybody doing this right? As we said, it's an issue everywhere in
Yes.
this region, in this county. Who's doing it right? North Park just passed their plan.
That's right. Well, yeah, North Park did increase housing density significantly. And,
different community from Encinitas.
Very different community, and a community that I think is a lot more welcoming of density. They've seen sort of the revitalization that it can bring to businesses, making the community more walkable. You know, having more people packed in can sort of create a sort of village. You know, if North Park is doing it right, maybe, I don't know. It's still very expensive there. I think that it's I mean, look up at San Francisco. There's a lot of very dense housing up there, and it's still extremely unaffordable.
Extraordinary. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens on this issue, and we're going to move on now, but we'll see how Encinitas deals with it in the aftermath of that. Well, Mayor Kevin Faulconer is delighted he doesn't have to bother campaigning around San Diego this fall. That's because he won an election outright in the June primary. But that could be the last election in which city politicians have that luxury. Andrew, what's Measure K, and how might that reform our political system here in San Diego?
So I think maybe it'll help to look at how we vote our state and federal representatives into government. So when you're voting for a congressman, a senator, or a state assembly member, you vote in a June primary, and then in November, the top two winners in that primary runoff in the general election. As you mentioned, in the city election rules allow somebody to win in June if they get an absolute majority of the votes. So what Measure K would do is basically align the city rules with the state and federal rules, forcing a November runoff no matter how many votes you get in June.
Okay, and Measure L is the sibling to Measure K, and what will that do? It's the same idea, right?
Yeah, it's a similar idea, also modeled on some state legislation that happened a few years ago. So basically it would require ballot initiatives and citizens initiatives when you gather signatures and force something on the ballot. Those have to be voted on in November unless the city council takes some special action. The idea is that they'll do that pretty sparingly.
JW?
I think this goes, the backstory is it goes to the demographics of who votes in the two elections, doesn't it? I mean, June is a certain voter profile, November is a different voter profile.
Well, especially if you've got a presidential election year in November where you've just got a bunch of more people coming out. Right?
That's right. So the roots of the roots of Measure K really go back to a little over a year ago when the Democratic Party and labor organizations were having a really tough time recruiting a candidate to run against Kevin Faulconer in the mayor's race. Their feeling was if only they could guarantee a candidate could make it to the November runoff election, then they would have better chances at winning the mayor's race. The reason is that voter turnout tends to be a lot higher in November, and it also tends to be a lot more progressive. There are a lot of minorities, young voters who don't pay a whole lot of attention when the June elections are happening. Also independent voters who don't necessarily feel like they have a role to play when you're electing a party's nominee. So if you force the November election, then we're going to have a more sort of democratic system.
And how did this get on the city ballot this time?
Well, so that discussion kind of lay dormant for a while. Not a whole lot of movement happened. And then back this last summer, a group called the Independent Voters Project went to the city council and asked, we want you to put this on the ballot. Ask for the city, because it would require a reform of the city's charter, it would require a referendum on it. We want you to write some rules, rewrite the rules, and say let's always have November runoffs. The same thing happened with Measure L. It was another organization called Alliance San Diego, a nonprofit, very progressive group that advocates for social justice and things like that. So it went through this existing process by which anyone can go up to the city council and say, can you place this on the ballot? Some of the criticism is that it went through this sort of expedited process. It didn't have a very long, lengthy review. They were, opponents to Measures K and L say, other cities, when they've reformed their election rules, they've had long campaigns going out, reaching out to community organizations, talking to different voters and asking them, how do you think we should change our election rules if we need to change them? And this sort of was fast-tracked through the city council, and now it's on the ballot.
And who's opposed here? I would expect Republicans are
That's
opposed.
right. So, you know, it's interesting now because a lot of the arguments for and against this were sort of partisan, that this will help the Democrats and hurt the Republicans. Now, nobody's really making that argument anymore, except the sides are still the same. It's still the Democrats and labor organizations that are opposed, and sort of business interests and Republicans that are, sorry, other way around. Democrats are supporting, Republicans are opposed. Okay. So it's nobody's really making the partisan argument anymore, but it falls almost exactly on ideological and
couple seconds, a couple words. Is it going to pass?
I think it's very likely. I would be really, just my gut feeling tells me it's very likely.
All right. We'll take a look on that one too on Election Day. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Eric Anderson of KPBS News, J.W. August of NBC7 San Diego, Allison St. John of KPBS, and Andrew Bowen, also of KPBS. All of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. And I want to remind you to check out the KPBS voter guide on our website. It's a complicated election with a lot of candidates, a lot of propositions that we talked about on this show. You can get all you need to make informed choices with our voter guide at kpbs.org. And I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.